It's time for Past Access, a barrier-free tour through history. Now, here's your host, Pete Collman.
Welcome to Sweden. Hey, I'm Pete Collman. Welcome to Past Access here in Stockholm, Sweden. This city is going to wow you. This episode's going to wow you. We're going to do so many amazing things on this show. As you can tell, I'm excited. I'm jazzed. All right. I've been to Stockholm many times, and I love this place. I discover something new every time I'm here. You could do amazing things. You could take a tour around the archipelago and see the wonderful little islands that make Sweden, Sweden. You can take a look at some of the museums. You can have your fair share of Swedish meatballs if you want. You can even go see ABBA. We're going to see all of that here on this episode of Past Access. Yes, we're going to take you to the ABBA Museum. We're going to interview the curator over there as well to kind of get an idea about how ABBA has affected pop culture over the years, of the decades. We're going to take you to the Vasa Museum. You won't soon forget the Vasa Museum. The 17th century shipwreck is in pristine state today because it was sunk, and the story is amazing, by the way. I won't spoil it for you. You have to wait for it, okay? And we're going to talk to the curator over there at that museum. We're going to talk about Vikings on this episode of Past Access. How cool is that, right? And if you're lucky, a little bit of Swedish meatballs. Delicious. So buckle up. We got a great show here for you in Stockholm, Sweden, here on Past Access.
Stockholm has been termed the capital of Scandinavia, and this place can be busy, but it also has a laid-back charm, especially during the summer months. The city is known for its high-priced designer shopping among its unique arts and culture, but don't be fooled. Stockholm is steeped in fascinating history. It can be difficult to see the past among the current architecture, but with a little effort, this past can come alive. We start our tour in the historic island of Gamla Stan, home to the Royal Palace and the Old Town District.
So we're getting ready to get close to a little bit of Old Town, a tour of that area, which is a wheelchair challenge. But before we even do that, let's take a look at the Royal Palace, what's right behind me, home to all the royalty of Sweden, including today, this royal family. But one thing you have to look at is when you see behind me, it looks like a little bit the palace you see in London, because it was styled that way due to a great fire in the late 1600s. Before that, going all the way back to the 1300s, the 1400s, the 1500s, and of course the 17th century, this was a very different looking place. It was a castle with giant towers and blue copper roofs. But a fire in the late 1600s changed all that and allowed the Swedish government to upgrade, if you will, to what you see behind me. And I think you're going to get a great look at the history from the very beginning.
We need to push up the hill past the Royal Palace first, before venturing into Old Town. It may not be a very easy feat for wheelchair users.
All right, so going up from the water here and going up to Old Town, that's the hill, baby. That's gonna be hard. So I would recommend either you take a taxi up to the top or you push it up with a friend. Meet a friend. Talk English to anybody here. They'll help you out. But it's a pretty little epic hill. So once you get to the top, you'll take a left, and then from there we'll see the beauty of Old Town. So let's get going.
With roots dating back to the 13th century, most of what you'll see in Old Town has influence from the 17th and 18th centuries.
We made it up the hill. I'm not kidding you. It ain't easy. So if you can, take a taxi to the top of this area here on Gamla Stan, which is the island here for the Royal Palace. It's really the oldest part of Stockholm, to be honest with you. It goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Right now, we made it to Old Town, or Stortorget, which is the real heart of Old Town. And it's absolutely very beautiful. A lot of nice bistros and restaurants and some shopping to do. The cobblestone and the brickwork on the ground is tough for wheelchairs. It is a bearing buster situation for your front casters. So again, it's a freewheel situation, or definitely big, large front pneumatic casters will be needed for you if you're in a wheelchair to get to this top level.
Making our way to the Royal Palace, we push over cobblestone streets and enter the parade ground courtyard, just in time for the daily afternoon pomp and circumstance of the Royal Guard. No kidding, this is an everyday event and something worth seeing during your afternoon tour of the Royal Palace. There's so much to see here, but time is of the essence. Our focus now is on the Royal Armoury and the Tre Kronor Castle Museums. The Royal Armoury Museum has displays that range from the medieval era through the 19th century. It is not uncommon to find knights on armored horses, battle-ready armor suited for a king, and even King Gustav III's costume made bloody from an assassination attempt at a 1703 masquerade ball. There are all kinds of regal artifacts in this cellar that portray the power and elegance of the Swedish royal families. This is definitely seen in Queen Christina's coronation carriages on the ground floor. Around the Royal Palace and up the hill is the wheelchair-accessible entrance for the Tre Kronor Castle Museum. You actually wheel through the original foundational corridors of this ancient castle structure. A wheelchair lift can get you to the next level to see the history of the castle, from the earliest fortifications through Sweden's European rise to power. If you listen closely, these ancient walls are said to give up their secrets. We turn our sights from a distant influence of history to a more recent cultural phenomenon of pop culture. If you grew up in the 1970s and early 80s, you were well aware of the group ABBA. It is here in the popular Gotland district where we will let the 70s nostalgia take hold. From Waterloo to SOS, and from Mamma Mia to The Winner Takes It All, the hits were golden for the supergroup ABBA. With the songwriting and stylings of Benny and Bjorn, combined with the harmonization and vocalists Annie Fried and Agneta, ABBA had that certain something that would hook you in. 73 released singles, 17 albums, 35 music videos, 14 top 40 hits, not to mention ABBA's 1992 Gold Best Of album that sold 30 million worldwide. Their success and reach was epic. Opened in 2013, ABBA, the museum, pays tribute to the ABBA founding members, Benny, Bjorn, Frida, and Agneta, and their collective rise to pop music stardom. It's all here: the tour props, the classic videos, the album covers, and of course, the outrageous fashion designs that scream ABBA. I had a chance to sit down with the museum director, Caroline Fagerland, to give us some insight into what ABBA the Museum has to offer.
Specifically, you have a new generation of people, millennials, that didn't grow up like maybe some of us did with ABBA during the 70s and 80s, that may be rediscovering it again. Tell us about that. Maybe the Mamma Mia movies have helped, or the play has helped to kind of garner that new sort of energy from millennial generation.
We do have a younger generation visiting us, because I believe sometimes I hear that people looking at the movies, they don't know that it's ABBA. So they just think, wow, this is a good song, and they look it up and see that it's ABBA. So we want to tell that story.
Wheeling through the museum, I was happy to find a barrier-free environment where I could reach and participate in the varied interactive consoles and activities. But, by avoiding the karaoke-styled sound booth, I may just have spared some other patrons a few minutes of ear trauma. But if I wanted to, I could have easily accessed and recorded my take on Super Trooper.
Also, we do not have any barriers getting into each room, so it just flows very, very smooth, and we have elevators going on each floor.
So Caroline, one of the exhibits that you mentioned is one of your favorites, and has to do with something called the red telephone. Can you tell us about that?
The phone is magical, because it really says a lot about the ABBA members wanting to come closer to their visitors and be more personal. So the telephone in the museum is connected to 4 numbers only, and they can call whenever they want. Last to call was Frida, just 2 months ago. talking to a visitor passing by. So I love that photo.
But it's the interactiveness of these exhibits that bring the music era back to life in its full 70s glory.
This on the ticket because you scan the interactivities and you get to, sing and be a part of the band, so to speak. So you will be able to get up on stage and perform as a fifth member of ABBA. So you will truly enjoy, and it's just all about the music, the magic, and the memories.
ABBA stamped its influence on an era of music that evolved or de-evolved into genres such as punk, new wave, and contemporary pop, many of which credit ABBA as influencers upon their music. For Benny, Bjorn, Agneta, and Frida, ABBA's success is firmly planted among rock royalty, and this museum stands as a tribute to their music, the magic of their times, and the collective memories shared.
Okay, so now from Shake Your Booty to War Booty. All right, I'm sorry for that kind of pun, but I think it fits a little bit between the ABBA Museum and a completely change of juxtaposition of our next stop here in Stockholm, which is the National Library of Sweden. So we're going to go over there right now for a very special tour of some war booty that was taken by the Swedish Army during the 30 Years' War from, I guess, my new hometown of Prague. If you can believe that, when the Swedes came down to Bohemia, they took and looted as much as they possibly could. And even today, it's a political football between the government in Prague and the government here in Stockholm about really what should war compensation be, even several hundred years away from the event itself. Should someone get compensation? Could you imagine that can of worms? Well, we're going to take a look at this, and I'm going to get my hands on manuscripts from Rudolf II's own private library. So something pretty cool we're going to get a chance to see. So let's head over to the library right now.
The National Library of Sweden houses some great treasures within her walls and climate-controlled vaults. For it is here that the 17th century prizes of war are painstakingly protected against the ravages of time. Mr. Janusz Kreslins, Senior Academic Librarian for Research Affairs of the National Library of Sweden, was kind enough to walk us back through time and present past access with some treasured books from the Swedish invasion of Bohemia during the 30 Years' War.
War booty process operation was rather complex. I mean, these materials were used as payoffs. These materials were used as show-off stuff. There was an awful lot of war booty which was not looked at all.
This nasty little war was one of the worst scourges that continental Europe faced until the 20th century. Full of religious overtones and political power grabs, Central Europe was the heart of conflict and bloodshed. In the summer of 1648, the Swedes washed over much of Prague and raided Prague Castle for the famed library of the late Emperor Rudolf II. A few local militia, a Jesuit priest, and a handful of university students of Prague held fast on Charles Bridge and fought the Swedes off until a treaty was signed. Yet the Swedes left Bohemia with priceless artwork, treasures, and of all things, books. Yes, these spoils of war were much more valuable than paintings, money, or jewels. Books and the knowledge within their covers were priceless in the mid-17th century. One of the more notable prizes of war was a 13th century Devil's Bible, also known as the Codex Gigas. This thing is huge and is rarely displayed. Even today, Swedish and Czech governments hold to a standoff on war booty repatriation of these 17th century relics. The occult legend of the Devil's Bible just adds to the mystique and is definitely a story for another time on our Past Access channel. Across the harbor, Past Access takes you to one of the most visited attractions in all of Scandinavia, welcoming over 1 million visitors a year. With its distinctive 3 masts, the design of the Vasa Museum starts to pique our interest as to what history is housed inside. The lines are usually long, but you're with us today, so we'll just breeze right on through. There is a wow factor as your eyes adjust to the darkened surroundings and see the immense structure of this early 17th century flagship of war. It's the Vasa, and on its maiden voyage in 1628, it slipped beneath the waves to sleep at the bottom of the harbor for nearly 3.5 centuries. So August 10th, 1628, on his maiden voyage, Vasa went off not too far, right around the corner here from the Vasa Museum today in 2019, and foundered, went right over. Light breeze had basically did some damage enough to kind of move the ship over because it was too top heavy. The ballast wasn't enough. The design failure really was its downfall, and it sunk. And because it sunk, it went about 30 meters or so down to the bottom of this sound here, and there it rested until 1961. This epic fail became a historic gift for modern-day eyes, for the simple reason that if the Vasa was successfully built to be seaworthy, there would be no example of a ship from this era in this condition. Discovered and raised from the depths in 1961, this enormous jigsaw puzzle of a ship was reassembled piece by piece and has been continuously treated against decay and deterioration. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. You see, the Vasa was a warship and a political power statement all rolled up into one. King Gustav Adolphus II of Sweden needed to build up an already depleted Swedish navy, and he needed a flagship. The construction of the Vasa was plagued by several setbacks, expedited time constraints, and the age-old fear of speaking truth to power. All this produced a ship ill-prepared for seafaring. So when you get down to the very bottom level of the Vasa Museum, you'll see that near the keel, I'm actually underneath the bow right now, but near the keel, you get a really good idea of the enormity of this ship. It is said that this took over 1,000 oaks to build. You can imagine oak is a wonderful wood, but back in the day it was also very rare in the sense of using it for a lot of ships. Sweden was having a hard time with their, we call it today a space race, but it was a naval race with all their competitors, and they didn't have enough ships. It was said actually that if you were to use as an average person several oaks to build your house, you could actually be executed. 3 oaks equaled execution. So people wanted to use the oaks for the ships only. So you might be asking yourself, if this ship is made of indestructible oak, how in the world did it sink? That's a great question, and the answer is very, very interesting, and we have that for you right now. Here's the breakdown. The ship was designed top-heavy, too tall with a much too narrow hull, so that no real amount of heavy ballast could keep the ship afloat in basic sailing conditions. These concerns were known, but it was too late to back out. The king needed his ship and needed it now. At 4 p.m. on August 10th, 1628, the Vasa set sail to much local fanfare. A catastrophe was about to play out. As customary, the Vasa would fire her guns and salute, so the cannon gun ports were opened. A light wind began to fill the sails, and the ship tipped to one side, allowing for the sea to rush in through the already low gun port openings, thus flooding the ship. In a mere minutes, the Vasa began to founder and sink, taking with her 53 souls and Sweden's shipbuilding reputation. Flash forward to 1961. The recently discovered location of the Vasa was about to culminate in a centuries-long reveal to the 20th century. The Vasa slowly made her way to the surface and was immediately kept wet to avoid drying out and splintering. The conservation would continue for decades to come.
So spraying it with water was the first step. Then quite soon after that, they could change and start using a conservation liquid, which was water mixed with something called PEG, polyethylene glycol. And that was done for a long, long time. The ship was sprayed with this PEG liquid for 17 years. Day and night, continuously, in the interior, on the outside. But today, no more spraying is done. In this museum today, we focus on the air, the climate inside the building. So what we have is a special climating system that keeps the balance when it comes to the temperature and the humidity inside the building to make sure that we have the best possible conditions for the wood for the ship.
Inside the museum, there's not a bad place to view the spectacular ship. The informational film is a good place to start, and it's wheelchair friendly. Models, hands-on displays, and interactive consoles are easily reachable for those of us sitting down. Cargo-sized elevators, although very busy, are ideal for getting around to various views from the top sail to the keel. But as Vasa's information officer Martina Segrist Larsen states, the cobblestone floor on much of the first floor can be a wheelchair challenge but not a hindrance, as it only partially covers the floor and stands as a historic throwback to the original shipyard docks.
Moving around in the Vasa Museum, like in your case with a wheelchair, is mostly quite okay. We have quite big areas around the ship itself to move around on the different floors. We have elevators that help you go up and down through the building to the different parts where we have the exhibitions, and you get to see the ship from different perspectives. Most of the museum has a floor that allows you to move smoothly. But yes, you're right, we do have an area where we have cobblestones, and the reason is that the architects, when they designed the museum, wanted to give the visitors an idea of how would it have been like to stand in Stockholm in 1628 on the quay, seeing Vasa in the water just next to the quay, and the quays could be made of cobblestones. But luckily, the cobblestones are only in one part of the museum, so the rest of it is so much easier for you to move around in.
It is easy to lose yourself in this museum, as every turn has something interesting to tell about this tragedy, including the forensics reimagining of the lives lost. Prepare to spend several hours to comb through this one-of-a-kind museum that showcases the thousands of man-hours spent to create the Vasa nearly 400 years ago, and the Herculean efforts of modern-day historic conservationists that allow us an unparalleled look back in time.
You know, this reminds me, as we're kind of going around from point A to point B here in Stockholm, from water ferries to trams and trucks and all those other things in between, it kind of reminds me this might be a good time for travel tips.
Taking mass transportation in a foreign city can be stressful. Not everything is completely accessible on the rails or on the road, but there are occasions when it's the best way to travel and most affordable. Well, some of that is true here in Stockholm with the Arlanda Express train from the airport to downtown. This speedy train will whisk you away to Central Station within about 20 minutes from the Arlanda Airport Terminals 1 and 2. Whereas it takes nearly double the time by car or by bus, the Arlanda Express is very wheelie-friendly and a direct shot to Stockholm with free Wi-Fi and an accessible restroom.
So now we're down in the train area for the express train to Stockholm. This train is going to go super fast and it's going to get us downtown to Central Station in a mere 18 minutes. It was inside 20 minutes. It would take about 50 minutes or an hour to drive down because we're pretty far outside the center of the city. So we're going to get on this train in a second as soon as it gets here, and we're going to start our trip to see Stockholm.
A single one-way ticket will cost you about 250 Swedish krona. That's about $30 US. Taxis will be the next highest cost at about 500 krona. The commuter train or the airport flex bus are great deals, but disabled access is not ideal. Because of this, the Arlanda Express train was the best choice for me and super easy. The yellow pay stations are easy to find and elevators are marked with the familiar yellow train images. Once downstairs, go to the information desk, as this is the best place to be for the handicap access train car as it positions itself when stopping.
Okay, so we're on the express train right now. Super easy to get on in a wheelchair. There's about a lip of about maybe 4 inches that separates the platform from the train itself. They can put down a ramp for you to get on, and there's usually someone to help you at the information station to get onto the train, which is super helpful. There are wheelchair accessible bathrooms here, but you really won't have that much time to think about using it because we'll be down in Stockholm in a matter of 15 minutes now. And I get to enjoy a little bit of that Swedish scenery.
The only issue I had was the large gap between the train and the boarding platform. I hopped across it with a small wheelie in my wheelchair with no real problems, but if you want to and you're somewhat concerned, ask for a ramp from the information desk and they'll be happy to provide it. Stockholm is just a short ride away, so have fun and enjoy your trip to Sweden. The marriage between the land and the sea is an intimate relationship for modern-day Scandinavians, but it was more interwoven in the daily lives of these people in the Viking era. Let's turn back the clock and just replace the modern-day tour boats with the ancient longboats of the Vikings. A simple day trip to Berka or a train ride away to Uppsala, and you can have an immersed day in Viking history and culture. But here in Stockholm, we focus on several places to get that first historical interpretation of these fascinating people. Much of what we know about the Vikings is tempered by inaccurate films and spotty history at best. Even the name Viking is more of an abstract noun. The act of going raiding overseas, as in to go a Viking, is really the true meaning. All of this seems to have muddied the waters on what we think we know about the Viking reality in the time frame around 800 until 1066. Near Skansen Park is the Viking Museum. This exhibit combines education with a small ride through an interactive Viking saga. Wheelchair accessible via modern lift, you are able to come face to face with the Vikings. The saga ride cars can be stopped to allow you to transfer inside from your wheelchair. This intimate museum can be a good introduction to the Scandinavian Vikings, but if you want a more in-depth look, you need to venture across town to the Sweden History Museum. Our museum tour guide, Ilan Stalhammer, tells us that the Vikings had a bit more depth compared to our cultural view today.
The majority of people during the Viking Age in Scandinavia were farmers, and only a few percent were able to be Vikings, when we talk about Vikings as in almost like a pirate, you know. And also the people who lived and were farmers and those who were peaceful.
They were farmers and warriors, traders and explorers. At times they plundered, and at other times they defended against these raids.
They also wrote that they feared Vikings. So we have some rune stones, for example, where a person is mentioned. It tells us that he protected the people against Vikings.
If you travel throughout Scandinavia, you will undoubtedly get different takes on what nation seems to have the true inheritance to the Viking lineage. Icelanders, Norwegians, Danes, and Swedes all honor their Viking heritage. The Sweden History Museum does an admirable job in showcasing the life of Vikings. Runestones, replica Viking longships, excavated weapons and skeletal remains are all on display. But there is much more to this museum than just Vikings. It is here that you can follow a timeline on the floor to see the very beginnings of the Scandinavian people. Take a quiz to see if you are a witch during the burning times. Or look upon some important religious relics through the Reformation. One exhibit that caught my eye were the remains of the 14th century Gotlanders after suffering a massacre at the hands of the Danes in 1361.
And the Battle of Gotland is where we're kind of looking at right now in the History Museum. What's impressive about this is that you'll see that there are so many skeletons that almost are a mummification state with the chainmail infused into the biomatter, basically. And the reason for that was this battle happened in a hot summer of 1361 when the Danes invaded this little island, this fortified little island of basically Swedish farmers that weren't ready to be rolled over. And they fought with their armor and chainmail. And when they fell, almost 2,000 of them fell on this battlefield. It was a massacre. The Danes did their job, but these guys didn't go down without a fight. And the reason why we're able to see this wonderful archaeological retrieval of the armor and the chainmail and these skeletons, you can see the skeletons here on the skulls with an infused chainmail, was because most likely after a battle, people would pilfer the stuff off the bodies, the swords, the shields, the chainmail, and keep them because it was very, very expensive. But because it was summer and the bodies were probably, excuse the imagery here, bloated and decaying, and in sheer numbers of the hot summer heat, they were probably just left to kind of sink into the mud, and that was it. And because of that, we're able to see this today and get the human quotient of this horrible massacre in a way that not many museums are able to provide. So I find this amazing when I come to this museum to see the cost of war, the Gotlanders' cost of war.
The Battle of Gotland displays the end result of the brutal times that Sweden witnessed in her history. A history that, much like during the times of the Vikings, is written in blood. Next time on Past Access, come with us to discover the beauty of the Veneto region of Italy. From the timelessness of the floating city of Venice and the enchanting legends of Verona, to the peaceful waters of Lago di Garda, Past Access has you booked on a vacation you won't soon forget. We will put our wheelchair travel skills to the test, traveling on planes, trains, and vaporetti. Andiamo! There's no time to waste, as there is so much to see on the next Past Access. National cuisine can tell us a lot about a culture. Here in Sweden, there is a term focused upon comfort and balance called lagom. And nothing fits this comfort food description better than Swedish meatballs, or köttbullar, as they are called here. Be careful of that pronunciation, by the way. Most of my Swedish came from the Swedish chef growing up, so take it or leave it. You can serve it up with its famous gravy sauce, as a party hors d'oeuvre, or even a la carte. Maybe you can even ask your Swedish mormor to make more of them for you with that little dash of love. Or order them up at just about any restaurant here in Stockholm. No matter where you find them, they're wonderfully delicious.
When it's nice outside in Stockholm, anywhere in Sweden rather, you need to be outside. It's called sun worshiping. And the thing is that the weather changes off and on throughout the course of the year, but these folks have about 8 months of winter, and you need to enjoy this weather when it's out here. It's about 21 degrees Celsius, and you will see parks filled with Swedes just enjoying the weather. And I thought this would be a good time to enjoy the weather too, get outside and take the last bits of summer in before the winter months come, and enjoy what we have here, Swedish meatballs. That's right, I promised you that, didn't I? Swedish meatballs, because this is basically on every menu that you can find all throughout Stockholm, and they're very, very good. All throughout Stockholm, and they're very, very good. You might be familiar with Swedish meatballs because your mom made them. I'm sure that's probably the best recipe, or you might get them at IKEA, so to speak, right? But these are fantastic. I don't know what they do, how they cook them, but they're really amazing. So they come with the berries, as you can see, and pickles, and mashed potatoes. But I'm going to try this one here and see what it's like. As expected, fantastic. Okay, you can't beat this. You come here, I think it's probably the third plate of meatballs I've had in 4 days. It's okay, I can keep eating them, I promise you. So, when you come to Sweden in the summertime, make sure you're outside, make sure you get Swedish meatballs, and enjoy the time you have here. It's glorious.
As the final tour boats come into dock for the day, Stockholm's beauty stands out with the soft glow of a setting sun. It is hard to say goodbye to these surroundings and the hospitable Swedes we encountered on this journey, but there are many more places for Past Access to visit. So as we say, hej då, let's say thanks to all the wonderful people that helped make this episode possible.
So that's it. That's our show. What'd you think? All right, Stockholm is an amazing place, man. I love coming here. I hope that you get a chance to come here as well. One of the big goals that I had for this particular show is to make sure that people with disabilities get inspired to travel around the world like I do and try to break down some of those barriers. If you love history, you can see some of this great stuff here. Like we saw here on this show, so much history in Stockholm exists, and you need to take a look at it. Look at this weather. Man, this is amazing in August to come here in Stockholm. Maybe not so great in wintertime, but that's maybe for another show. If I have a lot of courage, maybe you can send me here. If you want more information about some of my travels around the world, you go to pastaccess.com. We've got culture, we've got history, and tips of the trade about what I do to get on trains, planes, and automobiles when I travel around Europe and across the world. From a wheelchair, of course. If you want to help me get around the world, maybe to the next city to give you some information about wheelchair access, you can support the show. Go to podcastnicshop.com. You can get some wonderful merchandise to maybe help get me to the next city to help report back to you here on Past Access. So until next time, for Past Access, I'm Pete Collman. We're history.
You have been listening to Past Access with Pete Collman. For more information on the show or insight to disabled access at historic locations, please visit us at pastaccess.com.